In a small, forgotten southern town, a young woman struggled against the grip of poverty, yet carried a heart too tender to harden. When Clara Johnson discovered her frail old neighbor, once a devoted father, now abandoned and left to beg for food, she chose to help him every day, despite the cruel whispers of those around her. But when his billionaire son suddenly returned, her quiet life would be changed forever. The town lay silent under the weight of another long, sweltering day. Heat clung to the cracked pavement and sagging porches. Paint peeled like tired skin from weather-beaten houses, and the cicadas filled the dusk with their restless hum. Time had passed this place by, leaving only dust and memory in its wake. Clara stood in front of her family's worn-down home, the hem of her faded skirt brushing against her knees. At just 20, her shoulders bore burdens twice her age. She had learned early how to make a little stretch into enough. A pot of beans could last 3 nights if she measured carefully and stretched the cornbread thin. She had her mother's gentle hands, her father's steady eyes, and a heart all her own, soft toward suffering, quick to give even when she had little to offer. Across the dirt road, she saw him again. William Turner, once the strongest man she'd ever known, shuffled toward her gate with the careful steps of someone who feared the ground might give way beneath him. His back was bent now, his frame thinned by years that had taken more than they gave. Wisps of white hair clung to his head, and in his trembling hands he held a small tin bowl, dented and scratched from use, the way another man might hold a keepsake or a Bible. Clara's throat tightened. She remembered William as he had been, tall, broad-shouldered, a man whose laughter carried down the street, whose hands could fix anything broken. She remembered, too, the boy he had raised, Michael Carter. The whole town remembered. Michael had been the orphan no one wanted until William took him in, fed him, clothed him, gave him everything. William had gone without supper so Michael could eat, worked by lantern light so the boy could study. And then 8 years ago, Michael had left for the city. He had not returned. Now William stood at her gate, eyes lowered, shame pulling his shoulders down. Clara saw the tremor in his hand as he shifted the bowl. For a long moment he said nothing, the cicadas filling the silence. "Evening, Clara," he finally murmured, his voice rough and strained. "If there's a little to spare." Clara didn't hesitate. She slipped inside the kitchen where a pot of beans simmered weakly on the stove. There wasn't much left but enough. She ladled the beans carefully, filling the tin bowl halfway, and tore off a piece of warm cornbread, laying it gently on top. Her hands shook as she carried it back, not from reluctance, but from the sorrow pressing into her bones. William still stood where she'd left him, shoulders drawn in, eyes fixed on the ground as if bracing for rejection. Clara held the bowl out. "Here," she said softly. "It's not much, but it's hot and the cornbread's fresh." William looked up, and for a heartbeat Clara saw the man he once was, the protector, the provider, the father who had carried another man's child as his own. His lips parted and his eyes glistened. He took the bowl with careful hands, as though it were a gift far greater than food. "Thank you, child," he whispered, his voice cracking on the last word. Across the street, 2 men leaned against a fence pretending to work on a wagon wheel. Their voices carried easily in the still evening air. "Would you look at that?" one muttered. "The old man's begging again? Sad, ain't it?" The other replied. "His boy's a rich man now. Rich, but never comes home." Clara's spine stiffened. Anger rose hot in her chest, but she bit her lip. She wanted to shout that they knew nothing of William's sacrifices, the nights he'd gone hungry so Michael could have shoes for school, but she stayed silent, fists clenched at her sides. William heard too. His shoulders flinched before he forced a small, dignified smile. He lifted the bowl in a quiet gesture of thanks, as though he hadn't heard, as though pride still held him upright. Clara's heart ached as she watched him walk away, this once mighty man, now humbled to an empty bowl. She reached out, touching his arm lightly. "You don't have to thank me, Mr. Turner," she said gently. "You've done more for others than most men ever would. Don't you forget that." His tired eyes met hers, gratitude shining through the weariness. He nodded once, then turned down the path carrying his supper as though it were treasure. Clara stood long after he disappeared into the shadows, the cicada's song wrapping around her like a shroud. In that stillness, the town itself seemed to whisper a heavy truth. Sometimes the greatest men are left to walk with empty bowls. That night, Clara lay awake in her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling while the old timbers groaned around her. The image of William clutching his dented tin bowl refused to leave her mind. His fingers had trembled so violently she feared he might spill the beans before tasting them. Worse was the look in his eyes, gratitude laced with shame, as if accepting kindness was a burden heavier than hunger. By morning, her decision was made. No more waiting for him to knock on strangers' doors. No more standing at her gate with downcast eyes. She stirred a pot of beans, setting aside a portion before calling her family to eat. Her mother frowned but said nothing. Clara kept her resolve tucked deep in her chest like a hidden flame. That evening, when William appeared again, steps slow, shoulders stooped, bowl tucked close to his chest. He paused at the gate, unsure whether to knock or pass on. Clara stepped out before he could decide. "Good evening, Mr. Turner," she said, her voice steady. She held out a plate of beans and cornbread. William raised his head, startled. "Child," he said softly, "you don't have to do this." Clara only smiled, the quiet strength in her eyes answering for her. "Your family will always have a portion," Clara interrupted gently. "Don't go to other doors anymore. Come here instead." For a long moment, William stood frozen, pride and need warring inside him. At last he reached out, his hand trembling as he accepted the plate. "God bless you, Clara," he whispered, his lips quivering around the words. Clara settled on the porch rail while he ate. Dusk wrapped around them, cicadas droning their endless song, as she watched him spoon the beans with slow, deliberate care. A memory rose sharp and sudden. Years ago, when she was just a little girl, she had seen him give away half a loaf of bread. A group of hungry children had gathered on his porch, and William had torn the bread carefully, piece by piece, until nothing remained but crumbs. Every child walked away with food in hand. William drank only a cup of water. Clara had watched from behind the fence, too young to understand why a man would feed others and not himself. Now she understood. He had lived his whole life that way. Another memory surfaced, one whispered through the town for years. The cow, William's only cow, the one that gave milk for his table and a small income besides. When Michael's university tuition came due, William had led that cow down the dirt road to market. Clara had watched from a distance, his stride steady, his face unreadable. By sundown, the cow was gone, and by nightfall, Michael's fees were paid. Folks had called it foolish. Some said he'd lost his mind, but Clara knew better. He had traded comfort, even survival, so his boy could walk into a classroom with dignity. Now she looked at him on her porch, hunched over his plate, hands shaking. She thought of the cow, of the bread, of the countless nights he'd worked until dawn. Piece by piece, he had given away his strength until little remained. Her eyes burned. "It isn't right," she murmured, more to herself than to him. "After all you gave to be left like this." William glanced at her but said nothing, lowering his gaze as he chewed. Clara straightened her shoulders. "From now on," she said firmly, "you'll take supper here. Every night. I'll make sure of it." He froze, his spoon hovering. "People will talk," he said quietly. "Let them," Clara replied, her voice carrying more steel than she expected. "You deserve better than scraps from strangers." His eyes softened, glistening in the fading light. He gave a single silent nod, then resumed eating. The next day at the market, Clara heard the whispers. Two women leaned over baskets of tomatoes, their voices pitched just loud enough. "That Johnson girl, always sticking her nose where it doesn't belong. Taking food from her own family to feed that old man. Foolish girl. Too soft." Clara's cheeks flushed, but she kept walking, her basket clutched tight. Their words stung, but her resolve held fast. That evening William returned, and she met him again with a warm plate. Night after night, the routine began. At first, he barely spoke, ashamed of needing so much. But slowly, words began to slip free. He told her about the mill where he once worked, about summers when the fields were lush and green, about Michael running barefoot across the yard, laughter ringing like music. His stories always drifted into silence when his son's name lingered too long. His eyes would turn distant, his spoon resting forgotten. Clara never pressed. She simply listened, letting him remember. Over the weeks, his steps grew steadier. His shoulders straightened. Clara found herself listening for the sound of his approach each evening. The cough that preceded him no longer made her heart sink. It stirred a quiet readiness instead. The neighbors kept whispering. "That girl will wear herself thin," they said. "Kindness doesn't fill an empty belly." But Clara saw what they didn't. She saw the way William lifted his head a little higher now, the clearer timbre in his voice, the faint return of dignity in the tilt of his shoulders. One night, as the cicadas sang and the last light bled from the sky, William lingered after finishing his meal. He set the plate down gently and looked at Clara. A faint smile touched his lips. "You remind me of something I once believed," he said quietly. Clara tilted her head. "What's that?" "That kindness is never wasted," he replied. His eyes glimmered with something between sorrow and hope. "Even when the world forgets, even when those you gave everything to never return, kindness still matters." Clara felt her throat tighten. She reached out, laying a hand on his thin arm. "It does, Mr. Turner," she said softly. "It always does." And so their bond grew, built not on riches or grand gestures, but on beans, bread, and the simple refusal to let a good man be forgotten. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away, a rooftop party lit the night sky over New York City. Music from a live band spilled into the humid summer air while the city hummed below, restless and bright. Crystal glasses clinked, cameras flashed, and the elite of finance and technology mingled like dancers rehearsing a familiar routine. In the center of it all stood Michael Carter. His tuxedo was cut sharp to his frame, his hair styled for the cameras, his smile practiced until it felt like part of his skin. Guests pressed close with congratulations and questions about his next venture. A woman in a sequined gown leaned against his arm, whispering something playful in his ear. Michael laughed on cue. Only his eyes betrayed him, fixed on the glittering skyline beyond the terrace. Then his assistant tapped his shoulder and handed him a phone. "A producer from Channel 8, she said. "They'd like a word." Michael stepped away from the music into a quiet corner. The voice on the line was smooth and persuasive. "Mr. Carter, America knows your name. They know the billions, the buildings, the brand. But they don't know your journey. We'd like to change that, a primetime special. From dirt roads to digital empires. The boy who had nothing, who built everything." Michael felt the words stroke his ego like a familiar hand. He stared at his reflection in the glass. The tuxedo, the city lights glittering against polished shoes. "We'll start in New York," the producer continued. "But we also want to travel back to your hometown. The house you grew up in, the school, the streets, the people. We want America to see where you began, so they can see how far you've come." For a moment, Michael's throat tightened. The word hometown stirred an image from the depths of memory, a porch sagging under the weight of years. A man with strong hands pressing a shirt until the creases were perfect. A laugh that once filled the summer air. He blinked quickly, swallowing hard. Then he straightened his cuffs and forced a smile no one could see. "Yes," Michael said at last. "That sounds perfect." He told himself what he needed to believe. William Turner was surely fine. The old man had always been tough, always found a way. He probably sits on that porch still, Michael thought, shirt pressed, shoes shined, waiting for me to come back. The thought soothed him just enough to tuck it away. He slipped his smile back into place and returned to the rooftop party with a new story ready to sell. 2 weeks later, a limousine rolled along the dusty road that led into the town Michael once called home. The sky hung pale with heat, cicadas buzzing in the trees, dust curling behind the tires. A camera van followed close, the crew inside eager to capture every frame of contrast between the billionaire and the place that raised him. "Perfect backdrop," the director muttered. tapping the window as they passed a leaning fence and a porch with broken steps. "We'll shoot you stepping out right here. America will eat it up. Small town, big dream, classic." Michael nodded, silently rehearsing the lines he'd polished for days. "I learned to stretch $1. I learned to fix what I couldn't buy." Words meant to inspire, safe and shiny as the cufflinks at his wrists. He imagined how they would sound against peeling paint and rusted mailboxes. He imagined the applause. The limousine slowed to a stop. A crewman swung the door open. Sunlight struck him like a blow, blinding and hot. Cameras whirred, lenses lifted, microphones tilted toward him. Michael squared his shoulders, buttoned his jacket, and prepared to stride down memory's road like a man who had conquered it. Then, clang. A small metallic sound cut through the cicadas. A spoon tapping against a bowl. Michael turned his head. Across the street, on a porch shaded by tired curtains, stood a young woman in a faded dress. Her back was straight, her movements steady despite the heat. Clara Johnson. Beside her sat William Turner. His hair, white as cotton, framed a face thinned by years of sacrifice. He held a dented tin bowl close to his chest, the very same bowl Michael remembered from childhood. Clara ladled stew into the bowl with careful hands, tore a piece of cornbread, and placed it gently on top. William's hands trembled as he accepted it, his lips moving in a quiet thank you. "Hold the shot," the director whispered urgently. "Hold that." Cameras shifted, catching the fragile exchange. Michael's heart slammed against his ribs. Every polished line he'd rehearsed scattered like leaves in a hard wind. There was William, the man who had skipped meals so Michael could eat, now accepting charity. And Clara, standing where a son should have stood. From a fence nearby, two men murmured just loud enough for the microphones to catch. "Ain't that Turner? That's his boy, ain't it? The rich one. Rich as sin. And look at his daddy now, begging scraps." The words struck harder than any headline ever had. Michael staggered half a step, his polished shoes grinding the dust. He raised a hand to steady himself, but the small gesture only made him look smaller. Clara saw him then. Her eyes flicked toward the limousine, then back to the man in the dark suit. Her grip on the ladle tightened. She said nothing, but the silence in her stare spoke volumes. William raised his head slowly, as if pulled upward by some unseen weight. Recognition spread over his face. Not quick, but inevitable. For a heartbeat, pride straightened his shoulders, the same pride that had once carried a boy through hunger and schooling. Then it drained away. He drew the bowl closer to his chest, shielding it from pity. The cameras drank in every detail, the tremor in William's hand, the cornbread breaking, the billionaire frozen on the curb. The crew knew they were witnessing a truth no script could rival. Michael tried to summon his lines. "I worked hard. I rose from nothing, but the words tangled and died." All he could see was the man who had sold his only cow for tuition, who had fed a boy bread and drunk only water himself, now accepting supper from a neighbor's daughter. The street fell into a hush that felt like a storm drawing breath. Neighbors leaned on fences. Michael Carter stood stiff in a suit that suddenly felt 2 sizes too small. Across from him, William Turner clutched his bowl, chin lifted just enough to guard the last of his dignity. Clara stood beside him, chest rising with sharp breaths. The ladle clenched like a weapon of truth. Her voice broke the silence, raw. "Unrestrained, carrying farther than she intended. He starved himself to raise you," she cried, eyes wet. "He gave up his own food so you could eat, his strength so you could stand tall, his life so you could have one. And where were you when he needed you? You left him to beg spoonfuls at strangers' doors. Tell me, Michael Carter, is that what you call success?" The words cracked through the summer air like a whip. Neighbors gasped. Some covered their mouths. Others nodded fiercely. Clara's voice trembled but did not falter. She stepped forward, the ladle still in her hand. "All your money, all your cameras, all your speeches, none of it can erase the fact that the man who raised you is standing here with an empty bowl." A murmur swelled. Through the crowd. "Shameful," a man spat into the dust. "A billionaire who lets his own father go hungry," another said. "Louder. Forgotten his roots," a woman added. Turned his back on the man who made him, the sound of Judgment rolled down the street, each word striking like stones. Cameramen kept their lenses trained, hungry for the reckoning unfolding before them. Michael felt the heat of their eyes, the sting of their voices. His chest heaved. He tried to speak, but his throat locked. All the towers of glass and steel, the champagne nights, the magazine covers, shadows, all of them, shriveling in the harsh light of a single truth spoken aloud. Then a different sound broke the rising clamor. A gentler voice, weathered but steady. William Turner cleared his throat. His hand shook as he lowered the spoon, but when he spoke, the crowd fell silent. "Don't blame him," William said, turning his weary face toward the neighbors. "Don't blame my boy." Clara stared in disbelief, tears streaking her cheeks. "Mr. Turner, how can you?" William raised a thin, trembling hand, fragile but firm with intent. "He has his troubles. He has his burdens." "I know he does," William said, his voice thin but steady. "He hasn't forgotten me. He just hasn't found his way back yet." His lips curved toward something like a smile. "He will, I believe that." The crowd stirred. First a murmur, then a restless shifting of feet. Confusion rippled through them. An old man, frail and hungry, defending the son who had left him to starve. The contradiction felt unbearable. Michael's heart pounded so violently he feared the cameras might pick it up. His eyes burned as he watched William, his father, stand there shielding him from the anger of the town, shielding him with nothing but faith. The man who should have been his accuser had become his defender. The one who had suffered most offered forgiveness without hesitation. That mercy struck Michael deeper than all the accusations. Shame tightened around him like iron bands. His chest ached with a guilt he could no longer hide. For the first time in years, Michael Carter, the billionaire, the master of glass towers and glowing screens, stood not as a success, not as a symbol, but as a son. Small, broken, undeserving in the shadow of the man who had once starved so he could live. The silence that followed William's words was heavy enough to feel. Even the cicadas seemed to hold their breath. Dust floated in golden shafts of late sun as the cameras hummed, capturing every angle. Michael stood rigid in his dark suit, polished shoes planted on cracked pavement. Across from him, William clutched his battered bowl of stew, shoulders bent with age, eyes lowered in quiet endurance. Clara Johnson stood beside him, the ladle trembling in her fist, her jaw tight and eyes brimming. Then her voice cut the stillness like a blade. "He starved himself to raise you," Clara cried, her voice shaking but fierce enough for the whole street to hear. Tears streaked her cheeks as she stepped forward, pointing the ladle toward Michael like an accusation made solid. "He gave you every meal he never ate, every coin he never spent, every night he never rested. And where were you when he needed you? You left him to beg spoon by spoon at strangers' doors." Gasps rippled through the neighbors. A woman near the fence covered her mouth. A man shook his head and muttered, "Lord have mercy." Clara's voice rose higher, fueled by years of silent witnessing. "You call yourself a success? Is this what success looks like? A father with an empty bowl while his son drinks from crystal glasses in some faraway tower? Tell us, Michael Carter, is that the empire you built?" The ladle shook in her hand, but her words never faltered. "Look at him. Look at the man who carried you on his shoulders when you were too small to walk, who worked until his hands bled so you could learn your letters, who sold the only cow he owned so you could stand in a college classroom. And now he stands here trembling, waiting for scraps. If this is your success, then God help us all." A murmur rose from the neighbors, low at first, then swelling like a tide. "Ungrateful," someone hissed. "A man with all that money and his father starving," another said bitterly. "Forgot his blood." "Forgot his roots," a third voice added. The street became a courtroom without walls. The neighbors its jury, the cameras its scribes. Michael felt the weight of every word pressing on his chest like stones. His throat closed. He tried to breathe, to explain, but no sound came. Faces that had once cheered his scholarship, that had watched him leave with pride, now looked on with disgust. His legs felt heavy, as if the earth itself wanted to drag him down. Then another voice broke through, a voice softer, older, and somehow stronger than all the rest. William Turner cleared his throat. The rough sound quieted the crowd. He shifted the bowl closer to his chest and lifted a trembling hand. "Don't," he said. His voice cracked, but he forced the words out again, firmer this time. "Don't blame him." The neighbors stilled, startled. Clara turned sharply, eyes wide with disbelief. "Mr. Turner, how can you?" William shook his head, lips pressed into something like a weary smile. "He's had his burdens. Life in the city isn't easy. Maybe he lost his way. Maybe he thought I was stronger than I am. But he hasn't forgotten me. Not my boy. He just hasn't found the road back yet." His words stunned the crowd. A few scoffed, shaking their heads. "Foolish old man," someone muttered, "defending the one who left him." Another voice, softer, almost reverent, said, "That's love. Only love speaks like that." Clara's tears spilled faster. She lowered the ladle and pressed a hand to her chest. "He left you with nothing," she whispered. "And still you protect him." William looked at her, then at Michael. His eyes were clouded but steady. "Because he is my son," he said quietly. "And a father does not give up on his child." The words struck Michael like a hammer. He staggered, lips parting, but no sound emerged. He could have faced their anger. He could have borne their scorn. But this undeserved mercy from the man he had wronged most, undid him completely. The crowd murmured again, restless, torn between disbelief and awe. Some shook their heads at William's mercy. Others simply stared, caught in the gravity of love that refused to break. Others in the crowd wiped their eyes, moved despite themselves. The cameras zoomed closer, catching every trembling detail. The tears streaking Clara's face, the quiver in William's hand, the shock etched across Michael's. Michael's vision blurred. He blinked hard, but the sting only sharpened. He no longer saw the billionaire in glass towers or the headlines and applause. He saw himself as a boy, knees scraped, head bent over schoolwork, while William lit the lamp and worked late into the night, whispering encouragements he barely heard. He saw the man who had gone without bread so he could eat, who had sacrificed sleep and strength, now raising his voice not to accuse, but to defend, and that was the cruelest mercy of all. The neighbor's judgment still rang. The cameras still rolled, but in Michael's chest only his father's words echoed. "He is my son. I will not give up on him." The mercy cut deeper than every accusation. It hollowed him, left him raw and unbearably ashamed. He lowered his head, unable to meet William's eyes, unable to face Clara's tears, unable to bear the town's stares. For the first time in years, the man the world admired stood not triumphant, but undone. The silence pressed down until Michael's shoulders sagged, until the polished mask cracked and his eyes brimmed. Before the town, before the cameras, before the man who had given him life, he broke. His voice shook as it spilled into the hot evening air. "I let the city lights blind me," he confessed, words ragged. "I let the noise drown out the truth. I forgot the one who gave me breath, who gave me everything I am." The crowd hushed. Neighbors who had shouted leaned forward, caught between judgment and mercy. Clara held her breath, her hands trembling against her skirt. William stood still, bowl pressed to his chest, eyes fixed on the son who had finally spoken. Michael lifted his tear-streaked face to the crowd, his voice strengthening with every word. "From this day forward, my father will never stand on a porch with an empty bowl again. He will never beg for food. He will live with me, under my roof, at my table, and the world will know his name. The world will know that William Turner is the man who raised me, the man who gave me everything." Gasps rippled through the street. Some nodded. Some wiped their eyes. Others crossed their arms, wary but moved. The cameras captured every syllable of the billionaire's vow. Michael's knees bent. For the first time as a grown man, he knelt before William. Dust clung to his suit, but he did not care. He reached for his father's hand, thin and rough from years of labor, and pressed his lips against the calloused skin, tears falling freely. "Forgive me, Dad," he whispered, voice breaking. "Forgive me for every year I stayed away." William's hand trembled. but his smile was steady. The same gentle smile he had worn when Michael was a boy with scraped knees. The same smile that promised everything would be all right. His eyes softened, and with a tender squeeze he answered without words. Forgiveness had been there all along. The crowd fell quiet, not in judgment now, but in reverence. Even Clara, who had cried out in fury, felt her anger soften into something else. Relief, hope. The sight of a son kneeling and a father forgiving was more powerful than any accusation could ever be. Weeks passed, and the town watched Michael Carter change. The parties, the headlines, the hollow victories. He let them go. He worked with a steadiness that startled his boardrooms. He made fewer speeches and kept more promises. When he returned home again, it was not with a limousine and cameras, but to bring William Turner with him. William stepped into a house he never dreamed of, a mansion glowing on a quiet hill. Staff bowed, but Michael waved them aside, opening every door himself, guiding his father through each hall. At the long dining table, plates gleamed and food overflowed, but William bowed his head as he always had, whispering grace, not for survival now, but for gratitude. Clara was there too. Michael had not forgotten the young woman who fed William when he would not ask. He offered her a place, not from pity, but from honor. "You carried what I should have carried," he told her softly. "Let me repay that debt." Clara accepted, her new life steady and secure, carved from her own quiet courage. Nights in the mansion were no longer filled with glittering parties, but with something deeper, laughter that belonged to family, the kind that lingers after plates are cleared and stories retold. One evening, as servants cleared the table, Michael looked down the long stretch of polished wood at William, seated at the head. The old man's shoulders were no longer hunched in shame. His eyes shone softly beneath the chandelier's glow. He smiled, peaceful, unburdened, content. Michael felt his chest loosen, the guilt that once strangled him easing into something like redemption. He understood now what wealth truly meant. Money could build towers, but not homes. Money could fill rooms with strangers, but not family. Only love, only sacrifice, only honor could build what lasted. The mansion glowed against the night. But inside it was not marble or glass that shone brightest. It was the quiet dignity of a father restored, the humility of a son reclaimed, and the steadfast kindness of a young woman who refused to let goodness die. William Turner lifted his head and smiled, his heart at rest. For the first time in years, he was not a man with an empty bowl. He was a father surrounded by love, his family whole again.